Hi everybody, it's Martin here from Branco Customs, and in this video I bring to you how I built this awesome fixed blade knife. A good friend of mine came to me with this design and I said I'd make it for him, so this is how I did it. I started off with a piece of N690 cobalt stainless steel, traced the profile of the blade onto the steel using die chem, and then proceeded to drill all the holes whilst the bar was nice and flat and would fit in my vise. I then started off, put a slitting disc onto my angle grinder, went round and roughly trimmed off all the excess material. I then used my belt grinder in order to tidy up all the grinding, and then went on to start grinding the main bevels. I marked the center line of the blade with some blue die chem so I can ensure that it stays perfectly central whilst I'm grinding. With a rough grind like this, I don't take it all the way to the finished edge thickness. I normally leave about a millimeter or so on the edge, and this gives me a little bit of wiggle room so that when I heat treat it, if something becomes warped, which can happen quite easily, then I can always correct the error and it'll be perfectly straight in the end. I tidy up the flats of the knife on a piece of sandpaper that I put on the flat steel plate of my bandsaw and give that a damn good finishing, because ideally if this does finish nice and straight then those bits are already done, which saves a lot of time once the blade's hardened. I then wrap the blade in special heat treating foil, which is a stainless steel that is capable of withstanding temperatures up to about 1200 degrees C. I put a piece of paper inside the foil, which helps to burn up any oxygen that's left in there, which helps to prevent any damage to the steel when it's up at those high temperatures. These days I also use some talcum powder on the blade, which helps to prevent the foil packet from actually welding to the blade. I was quite excited to make the handle of this knife, as I had these lovely pieces of carbon fibre and also black G10 and orange G10 for the liners. cut out all the pieces on the bandsaw. In order to create the nice dovetail feature, I actually rig up my belt grinder with the platen set at bang on 45 degrees. With this I can grind both the bolster piece and the main handle scales and know that when I put them together it's going to be a perfect joint. Everything that gets glued together on one of my knives is finished with a pretty rough sandpaper beforehand and then cleaned down well with acetone to make sure that all my glue joints are going to be really well keyed and really well bonded. I also only use very high quality epoxies in order to make sure that I never have glue joints fail. Again, I use the nice cast iron flat of my bandsaw table in order to glue the pieces together. And it actually has a channel cut into the table, which is perfect to ensure that the spacer that goes between the bolster and the handle actually has a little bit of room underneath so it won't glue itself to the table. Once those bits are dry, I then go and sand everything 100% flat and then glue and clamp the actual main liner underneath the scale assembly. This is best done with like a 36 or a 50 grit sandpaper. The sandpaper I use is one from a company called Indasa, which is a very high quality sandpaper. Who knew that you could get different grades, but now I'm well aware that you definitely get what you pay for when it comes to sandpaper. these, I actually clamped them down onto a piece of melamine board that I had, and I put a piece of masking tape on the board first so that any excess glue that tries to bond the handle scale to the board, I can then just peel off the tape and break the bond. Once the heat treatment is completed, I take the blade over to my surface grinding attachment and clean up all the flat edges. I also do an initial rough shaping of the handle scales where I make sure that the profile of both the scales are identical to one another. This makes it much easier when I drill the holes through the blade of the knife in order to make sure that both sides of the scale will align and that both sides of the dovetail on the blade will line up perfectly. I'm a firm believer that the attention to details and little things like that, making sure that those two orange lines aren't going to be misaligned by even the tiniest margin, makes a massive difference to the quality of my product. I then move on to drilling the handle scales, and for this I actually use drill bits as keys. So when I drill a hole, I then stuff another drill bit into that hole to completely attach the tang of the handle into the scale. I then move on to doing the next one, put a drill bit in that, move on to the next one, and so on and so forth. This means that when it comes to assembling everything, the fitment and the pitch of those holes is absolutely bang on. There's no way it can be wrong. For all of my drilling, I use cobalt stainless steel drill bits because they are 1,000,000 times better than any HSS drill bit you can get. Once everything is drilled and cleaned up again, I then make sure that all the surfaces are thoroughly degreased with acetone, and then again I'll whip out some of my high quality epoxy and coat both sides of every part and the insides of every hole and the outside of every pin before then assembling. The last thing I want is a dry joint. Once everything is assembled, I then get on as many clamps as I can feasibly do and then leave it overnight to dry. The next day I come back and finish the roughing by removing all the excess carbon and also grinding the pins down to size. Then on to doing the rough shaping of the handle. For this I use the small wheel on my grinder in order to profile the handle. I then put it onto a 45-degree platen again and take the corners off all the way around the profile, and then more small wheel action to do blending between those two areas. Then for the final shaping I move on to hand sanding with cloth backed sandpaper. I clean up the lanyard hole using a radius router bit which goes in there and leaves a nice little profile. I also use a piece of sandpaper on a similar Dremel bit in order to clean out the lanyard tube and leave it a nice shiny finish. At this stage, the laborious task of working my way up through all the various grits of sandpaper begins. I'll start off generally with about a 120 grit, move from there to a 240, from that onto a 320 or a 400 depending on what I have at the time, and then normally 600, 800, 1200, 2500, and then if I've got some I'll even go up to 3000 or 7000 grit, which is really polishing, and then from there move on to the buffing wheel for a light buff with some white compound. At this stage the knife is nearly complete and what's left is for me to put an edge on it. For this I use a jig with my wheel on my grinder, and you'll see the T-bar section that I can use to change the angle up and down. I have a clamp that I use to clamp the blade of the knife into, which sets the angle perfectly. These days I've actually done away with the clamp and I actually use a magnet that sticks it to the blade. For stropping I use auto sole polish on a piece of leather, and this has a nice amount of granules in it, just enough to really hone that edge as well as polishing I start off with a little bit of pressure on the blade as I'm going back and forth, and then gradually get lighter and lighter. As the burr rubs off, I then basically start polishing the edge, and it ends up being slicey sharp. And here's what we ended up with in the end. Thank you all for watching. We'll see you again soon. If you like my videos and the things I create and would like to see more of it, please hit like, hit subscribe, and then if you also hit the notification bell, you'll be notified as soon as I release some new material on YouTube. You can also find me on Instagram, Facebook, or why not check out my website for the most comprehensive information. And if you would like to either order a custom knife for yourself or as a gift for someone, please check out my website, www.brancocustoms.com. Thank you.